Today we're going to talk about a company called Mercado Libre. And I think that most Americans, like myself, with their dos cervezas por favor Spanish, probably have some idea what these words mean. So Mercado means market and Libre means free. So it should be fairly intuitive what this company does. They're often referred to as the Amazon of Latin America. They were founded in 1999. That's just 5 years after Amazon was founded. But when you look at their financials, it's quite interesting. And here on the right, you can see the growth of revenues. That's some quite nice growth there to $7 billion in 2021. And then below that, you can see the breakdown for the first 3 quarters of 2022, just how much Fintech has become a part of their business. So are they the Amazon of Latin America or the PayPal of Latin America? And I think the answer is they're probably a little bit of both. When you look at the growth of Fintech, that's largely come from this component called Mercado Pago, a digital payments platform that originally helped money flow across their online marketplaces. Well, now they have a full-blown Fintech platform for both digital and in-person transactions, more along the lines of what you see with PayPal or Square. In addition, they're giving out loans to sellers and buyers in the geographies you see here: Argentina, Brazil, Mexico, and Chile. Those first 3 countries are predominantly where they do business, with more than half of their revenues coming from Brazil. They also started dabbling a bit in crypto, perhaps trying to democratize access to poverty for the masses, but that doesn't seem to be a large component of what they're doing. The fastest growing revenue stream for the company is interest and fees on credit transactions. It's quite important to pay attention to. That's nearly $1.5 billion for the first 3 quarters of this year, or about 44% of their total fintech revs. That's triple what it was for the same period last year. Consumer credit accounts for over half of that. Then you have merchant credit at 25%, and then credit cards. So when you look at the growth potential of LATAM and where all the money is coming from venture capitalists, this is an interesting chart here that shows how more than half of that money is going into fintech and e-commerce. So these are areas of growth that are receiving a lot of investment, and typically, as you'll see with themes like this that are, let's say, more mature, there's a lot of competition. And recently, the funding for LATAM fintech has been falling, as you can see here on this chart. That's just the nature of the current bear market that we're in. So why has so much funding been going into the Latin American fintech marketplace? Well, CB Insights did this market map here to show some of the players, and they attribute it to 3 reasons. One is that internet adoption is quite high in Latin America. It's somewhere around 65% compared to 55% for the rest of the world. Mobile adoption is quite high. Regulators are actually aiming to lower the barriers to entry. We'll see how long that lasts. And then there's a generally positive market outlook for these various geographies. Now, let's talk a little bit about the bread and butter for Mercado Libre. That's their online business. Here you can see that these screenshots were taken from about 10 years ago, and they're implementing social content onto their platform there on the left. On the right here, you can see they've launched a mobile app. So pretty much following the same trajectory as most tech companies like Amazon. Here's a screenshot that looks at a current website for Brazil, and you can see how they're really situating the fintech components of their platform along the bottom there. Now, when you look at market share, it's quite competitive, and here this Silverlight asset management firm has laid out the various geographies of interest and the market share that each of these companies commands. And you'll see a lot of different numbers thrown about, but it's generally accepted that Mercado Libre in Brazil is the leader in terms of market share, along with the other 2 primary countries they operate in, Argentina and Mexico, which you can see here. So in Brazil in particular is of interest because that's more than half of Mercado Libre's revenues. And here you can see this chart on the right showing of the Latin American countries which are paying the most visits to Amazon. And Amazon in that previous chart we looked at was nowhere to be seen except for, I think, one country, which was Mexico. So Amazon is actually competing quite closely with Mercado Libre in Mexico. But when you look at the traction that they're making in Brazil, which is the biggest piece of the pie that they want to capture. You could see here, we took this from the Brazilian Society of Retail and Consumption. It ranks these online marketplaces, and Amazon is very low on the list if you include third-party sales. If you don't, then they're about a tenth of that. So Amazon's strategy has only been to focus on Brazil quite recently. So over the last several years, they've been investing heavily to expand their market share in Brazil. Since 2020, they've increased the number of distribution centers there from 1 to 12. And this magazine article is quite interesting by International Valor. It's titled Amazon Invests Heavily to Gain Market Share in Brazil, and it has the head of operations. They're talking about how this is just the beginning, and the important investments they're making now are with a return horizon of 5 to 10 years. So it'll be interesting to see how that affects Mercado Libre. Now, when we look at this company, as an investment, one of the things that we consider is size. So this is actually in more or less our target size. It's a $48 billion market cap. You could see here along the top the size of companies that we're targeting, or our target allocations. Below that, you can see the buckets that we classify companies in. So Mercado Libre would be considered large, and that's kind of our sweet spot. So I'll give you an example. Well, Google. That was a company we invested in around the time of their IPO, and over time we trimmed that position and finally exited it in order to establish the 37 stock portfolio that we have today, and we saw a return on that of about 5,378% from IPO to where it sits in terms of market cap today. So we didn't realize that entire return. We sold, I think, several years ago, but you could see that sweet spot and how it can be harvested once it comes to maturity. So if there's the belief that Mercado Libre can command the same sort of market cap that Amazon has, there's certainly quite the bull thesis there. However, Amazon is a formidable competitor with somewhere around $56 billion on their balance sheet, so they can certainly compete on cost. And Mercado Libre has been practicing their craft for 23 years now, so they've been around for a while. And one thing we've noticed for tech themes that are late to arrive in emerging markets, there's always a lot of competition, and there's really two contingents there. One would be all the local players that have jumped into the game, and two would be the global leader that is either competing or comes to compete later. And it usually gets viciously competitive, and often it will come down to cost. You saw that in Indonesia in the payments sector there, where the person with the deepest pockets ended up winning. So our last emerging markets play for e-commerce was in Alibaba, and we harvested that return. I think that was a weighting of somewhere around 30% of our portfolio at one point when we sold. And you can see on the chart below how that would be a good time potentially to exit now that there's some maturity around their market penetration, though China has some tremendous potential. But pivoting into fintech sure seems to be a natural avenue for e-commerce, as we saw with Alibaba and Alipay. So those are just some final observations. And just to conclude, Mercado Libre is now equally a fintech and an e-commerce play, and both those domains have an exceptional amount of competition, including, at least in the case of LATAM, fintech and e-commerce now, one of the world's biggest companies. And for that reason, the competition and the fact that Amazon is digging in their heels, we're going to be avoiding this stock going forward. So please put your comments in the comment section. Make sure to subscribe to our channel. Thanks so much for taking the time to watch this today.